Hey there, this is my final exam presentation for wildlife conservation policy, so I hope you enjoy and we'll get started. So to start out, I would like to briefly go over my position currently on animals being kept and added to the Endangered Species Act. And to be very clear, I support and will always support animals being added into the ESA. And for me personally, I would rather add more protection than less protection, even if it's not always needed in certain situations. I think it's better to have more protection because once an animal is gone, you can't get it back. And so I also feel that proof without a doubt is needed in order for an animal to be removed off of the list. I don't think that an animal should be removed from the list unless it is absolutely for certain that it will be safe when it's not on the list. And then just another point I would like to make is that prairies are not often thought of as a very ecologically unique place, but they're some of the coolest places on Earth, and especially in America, and they're very iconic habitat, especially when you think about what makes America so different and diverse from other countries. So as far as ecological impacts goes, to start out by looking at the lesser prairie chicken, these guys play critical roles in not only the health of the grasslands, but they also play a very large role in preventing erosion, and they can even help with water quality. And these both are very important because on the prairie, if erosion occurs, it can vastly change the way that the landscape is set up. And water quality is always important for wildlife. And so if they were to be removed from the grasslands, all species on the grasslands could potentially suffer. And this also points to them being an indicator species. And then another important point is that up to 90% of their habitat has already been lost. So they're living on 10% of land that 100 years ago they would have had much, much more. And so they are very quickly facing extinction because they have quite a few threats against them and not very much protection. Another species of importance for ecological impacts is the northern long-eared bat. These guys are super, super cute. I'm a big fan of bats, so learning about these guys was so fun. But these guys face dangers such as white nose syndrome, which many bats all across America do. They also face threats like deforestation and loss of habitat. And they are very much critical because they can help with pest control. They eat a lot of mosquitoes and other types of bugs, which is really nice for us humans. But they can also pollinate plants and disperse seeds. So they have quite a few ecological benefits. And just in general, bats everywhere are declining, especially due to white nose syndrome and just other deforestation threats. So these guys are not the only ones that are suffering, but they are definitely one of the species that needs protection the most. And so that brings me to Senator Roger Marshall. He is the one that I wrote my letter to for this assignment. And he is one of the signers for the legislation that would remove certain species from the ESA. And so his environmental stance previously is that he feels like the ESA is over-regulatory and that the economy suffers due to the fact that it's over-regulatory. And like I mentioned earlier, I honestly do not agree with that because I would rather it be over-regulatory than under-regulatory because, like I said earlier, once the animals are gone, you can't get them back. And so his general stance today is very similar to that. He usually votes unfavorably towards endangered species, and a prime example is his no vote to keeping lesser prairie chickens on the endangered species list. And so how I hope he will change and what I wrote my letter to him about is I hope he changes his stance and to be more conservationally friendly. It is my belief that the economy is not as important as taking care of the environment around us. And so I mentioned that in the letter, and just that lesser prairie chickens are actually very important to the environments that they live in. And so I would hope that he would change his vote on that. Now, as far as the next presidential campaign goes, the future changes with the Trump administration, I think, will mostly hurt the ESA. Unfortunately, the National Resources Defense Council predicts that more animals will be stripped from their protections on the ESA and have less regulations, and will be placed on habitats moving forward will not have as much protections as they did. And specific events, just to cite some examples, are previously the Trump administration has lessened restrictions on places where oil and gas can be harvested, specifically because this is an expensive commodity, and these types of things diminish any protection that the species that are already living on this land has. So that can be really detrimental to anything that lives there, whether that be a plant or an animal, or even a migratory bird that doesn't live there all the time. And many places are left with no protection due to this and little regulation in order to boost the economy, because these commodities are something that many people are interested in. And so lastly, how are politics intertwined with policy? In my opinion, politics will always be connected to policy. I don't think that there will be a time when these two are not intertwined with each other, because laws are needed for policy to take effect, and politics are what regulates laws. Politics are also what fuels different types of legislation to be built, and even though, in my opinion, there shouldn't be a side to pro-conservation or not conservation, laws will always affect that. And so even if a law is good for conservation, it might not be passed. And I really think that that priority should be shifted. I know that's quite the goal, but my hope is that one day conservation will be a major priority and not just something that can be found on a ballot. Don't necessarily think that we should be voting on the future of a species. I think that that should just be something that is already put into place, but that is not the way that the world works, and so that's why I think that politics will always be intertwined with policy. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. These are my references, and I hope you have a great night.